Into question 3, and again calling the Honourable Member for Douglas East, Mrs Barber.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to ask the Chief Minister how many days elapsed from the date of contact with an infected individual before A, the person was contacted by the track and trace team, B, the person was swabbed, and C, self-isolation notifications were issued, broken down by response in each of the recent cases within the cluster first confirmed at the press briefing on the 12th of November.
Calling the Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The recent cluster involved a total of 8 positive confirmed cases. I can say that following the initial travel-related case, which has been identified as the transmission route, there were 3 further positive cases where close contacts were identified. In the first instance, on the 9th of the 11th, a total of 7 high-risk contacts were identified. 6 were contacted, isolated and offered swabs on the same day. 1 was identified, isolated and offered a swab the following day, the 10th of the 11th. All known contacts were identified, swabbed, tested and the results known within 24 hours. In the second instance, on the 10th of the 11th, 2020, 11 high-risk close contacts were identified. 9 were contacted, isolated and offered swabs on the same day. 2 were contacted, isolated and offered a swab the following day on the 11th. 8 results were known on the 11th of the 12th, and 2 tests were known on the 12th. Now, 1 contact was swabbed, tested, and the results known on the 14th. 1 person declined a swab. In the third instance, on the 10th of November, 2 high-risk close contacts were identified. One was contacted, isolated, and offered a swab on the same day. 1 was contacted, isolated, and offered a swab the following day on the 11th. 1 test was known on the 11th. The other result was known on the 12th. The remaining cases did not have any further close contacts associated with them outside of those already known to contact tracing and were undertaking their 14-day self-isolation period. Mr Speaker, it is clear that all identified high-risk close contacts were contacted by the contact tracing team, with the majority of those identified offered a swab, tested and results known within 24 hours.
Supplementary question, Mrs Barber.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Chief Minister for a comprehensive answer and also thank both the contact tracing and the swabbing teams for what I think actually was an excellent job in this regard. I'd just like to ask whether those high-risk individuals, when they were advised to isolate, whether they were also advised that their people who resided with them in the household were also advised to isolate.
Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The policy at the moment is that if you're high risk, the rest of the household does not have to isolate. That's a decision taken on the advice we're given. It's all about risk. Obviously, it's the sort of thing that is monitored, and should the situation need to change, then that it will be changed, but at the moment in time it's not.
Supplementary question, Dr Allinson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would the Chief Minister agree with me that the ability to have rapid on-island testing and the expertise of the track and trace team on the island meant that this cluster was contained very quickly for the safety of the general population? Thank you.
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Yes, I think it's, and I'd like to add to the comments made by the Honourable Member for Douglas East about our teams who do the contact tracing, and well, all our teams in general, but in this instance, we sadly had a case where someone came back from the UK and we had a small infection on the island. It was shut down immediately. All the contacts. We are down now, Mr Speaker, to 4 active cases in the community, of which 2 had nothing to do with this case. And I pay tribute to the hard work of our contact tracing team, who are delivering 100% of contact tracing. When you compare that, for example, with positive cases identified in the UK at 84.9%, I think our team are delivering and are a credit to the people of the Isle of Man. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Was the person who refused the test one of those who subsequently had a positive test?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I can't identify individual cases. We do not make it mandatory for people to have a test. They would, however, therefore have to wait the full 14 days as a result. But I can't comment on individual. I don't know myself, and it's not fair that I would know anyway. It's not fair for us as politicians to be given individual data. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Chief Minister just confirm for absolute clarity that we have 4 live cases on the island, but none of those are community cases?
Chief Minister should reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm more than happy to confirm that we have 4 active cases on the Isle of Man. 2 were in no way related to the initial cluster, for want of a better word, that we've had, and none of them are in the community. None of them have caught whilst out in the community. They were isolated as being high risk. They were tested. They came back as negative. Now, when you're negative, it means you haven't been passing it on in the community. And then when they were in their quarantine period, the other 2 remaining then developed COVID. So they were in quarantine. It's not active out in the community. And the other 2, as I say, were totally not related to this case. They had travelled to the UK for a short period, sadly picked it up, were on their own and isolated, were a horrible word to use, textbook, but they did everything to the letter of the law. So I'm very pleased that everyone involved has been so responsible, who have been unfortunate to be caught up in this cluster, but as a result of the people following the rules and regulations, the Isle of Man is in a very good position, and I thank them very much.
Supplementary question, Mrs. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wonder if the Chief Minister can confirm where a high-risk contact refuses to have a swab, whether then the rest of the family would be expected to self-isolate as a precaution.
Chief Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't say yes, that's the case at the moment, but what I will do is I will speak to our medical experts. I speak to them regularly. It is something that we have debated whether or not the whole household of a high contact should be closed down. It's not a household where the person has it. They're only a high contact, and at this moment in time, I suppose it's all risk. If you're 100% risk averse, we don't allow anyone to leave the island. It's all about respecting the advice from our medics and our public health, looking at all the other data on what they feel is acceptable. But I'm more than happy to ask that question on behalf of this honourable member, and I will let all honourable members know. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.